You are listening and attending a conversation with Shay's Pretty Skinny, the podcast. And we're doing everything except keeping it cute about self-love, resilience, and personal development. Have you ever been out with someone, like someone that you're romantically interested in, and maybe saw a different individual who's attractive, right? Maybe they walk past and you're like, oh my gosh, did you see that person? Now, nine times out of 10, if it is a man being asked that question, he may decide he's going to respond and say no, because if he says yes, it could open up other conversations, things that he's not thinking about. He's just simply responding to what his partner is pointing out. Um, if it's a woman and a man says it, maybe she'll be thinking, is he more attracted to this person? Especially if she doesn't think they look similar or in the same type of group. So little things go on, right? And so then to keep the quote unquote peace, we may be, oh, I didn't notice that, or no, I didn't see that, right? Just little things like that. And I met someone who they don't do things like that, right? And it was very surprising to me. But it had me thinking, brought me to a question, and I thought, let's talk about that today because we tend to ask people for things that they don't know how to provide, right? Someone doesn't know how to love, but we want them to love us in a certain way. If kids are supposed to be mature and make good choices, but there's no instruction on how to do that. There's no direction, no modeling, right? Um, if our parent asks us if they look okay or, you know, if their food tastes good, we want to say yes. We don't want to hurt their feelings. And so that got me to thinking, why? And it doesn't just apply to men, but I just thought it was a good example and it came up in that example. So that's why the title's, do we teach boys not to lie or do we teach them to lie better? So let me kind of develop it a little bit, okay? Because when we tell boys, don't lie to me, is that something that is creating an environment where they can practice telling us uncomfortable truths, though? Okay. Because I think that's two different things. And before anybody tries to get mad at me, I am not saying that mothers make men lie. No, because adults still have to choose, right? That's not what I'm saying. And I'm definitely not even saying that grown men shouldn't be accountable for lying, okay? Or anyone, because men lie, women lie, right? So anyone needs to be accountable for telling the truth and being untruthful to someone. Now, what I am asking is, where did that practice, like what relationship did that practice come from of avoiding things or telling quote unquote white little white lies, things that we think won't hurt, right? But we also don't want to cause a deeper conversation, right? So it's where did you practice that? What relationship did that develop in? That you're using with me, right? Because we practice our lives, and I've said that many times. We practice how we're going to communicate or what type of communication style we want to have. We practice how we handle conflict. We practice vulnerability or the lack thereof. So we practice avoidance, right? We practice telling the truth. And yes, we practice lying too. So don't lie to me. Now, think about being a child. And so your mother is asking questions like, who broke that? Where were you? Where'd you go? Um, why did you do that? Right? Did you finish your homework? And sometimes there's that next sentence that comes. So it's don't lie to me. And then that next sentence is, and you better tell the truth, right? You better not lie to me. Now, that sounds like we're teaching honesty, but what happens, what happens when children actually tell the truth? That's a question sometimes as parents, and I'm a parent, we don't we don't want to talk about that, right? Because if they come out and say, well, I broke it. No, I didn't do my homework. I went somewhere you told me not to go. I did exactly what you told me not to do, right? If they give that response and then the parent loses it, right? Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not suggesting there shouldn't be consequences. Definitely, that's not the conversation. If you broke the lamp after I told you a million times to stop throwing that ball in my house, then we have some business to discuss. There's some things to take care of, right? And parents do that, don't we? Don't Okay, you're gonna do this. Okay, this is gonna happen. And then when it happens, boom. So it's the same concept. Accountability still matters in this conversation. We're not putting it to the side. But there's a difference between there are consequences for what you did, and there are emotional consequences for telling me what you did. Okay? That's what we're talking about today. That's the part that I want us to really focus on. So if I'm looking at this conversation for men, right? Because I date men, so that's how my perspective comes out. But please spin the perspective, and please do understand that I mean all children and I mean all adults, right? Because we all have childhood experiences and we're raised by some type of parental figure. Now, what we intend to teach is don't lie, right? But the real lesson that's being practiced is figure out which answer causes the least trouble. And we don't think of that as a lie, right? It's just a little white lie. It's an answer that causes the least trouble, and it's not thought to be harmful or traumatic to someone. So those two things are very different. And children are excellent students of consequences. Okay. If telling the whole truth repeatedly leads to yelling, humiliation, rejection, interrogation, hours upon hours, and I laugh at that because it's something that I had to work through, or an emotional explosion, then a child may start managing information. What does that mean? Then managing information is maybe leaving out something, telling half of the story, waiting to be confronted about it, right? So if you ask me about it, okay, then maybe I need to speak up. But even if you ask me about it, maybe I'm not going to tell you everything because I don't know what you know, and I don't want to give you too much information because giving you too much information is going to cause too much of the what? The yelling, the humiliation, the rejection, the interrogation, the emotional explosion, right? Um, maybe, not maybe. I think kids are very aware of our body language and our facial expressions and our moods, right? And so then based on that, they decide how much truth we are ready for, how much truth we can accept without, again, yelling, the humiliation, the interrogation, the rejection, the emotional explosion. And eventually, maybe they get good at it. They get good at it. And I tell my kids, I say, oh, you're not good at it. So just don't do it. But maybe they do get good at it, right? Because it's working. Now, fast forward 20 years. And his partner is asking, where were you? What happened? Why did you do that? Right? Why didn't you tell me? Like when a man loses a job. Why didn't you tell me? But I'm also aware of a situation. I saw a documentary where a woman lost a job and she was using the time to bully her daughter and call her all kinds of names. So that's what she did for work all day. So again, it's not a gender thing. Just this is the example being used, okay? So it's where were you? What happened? How do you really feel? And sometimes inside him, that old calculation may still be running, right? That relationship with mom or the parent. If I tell the truth, what's going to happen next? Because mom is the first example of interacting with feminine energy, right? With femininity, with how women may handle things. Um, and again, it's not just generalized. There's just a lot of similarities, right? So if you're looking at, okay, my mom does this, she gets nails done, she wears these kinds of clothes, she does this, then that's the standard that's first developed. And it's the same with communication and reaction, right? So if I'm telling the truth, that's what's going to happen next. Is she gonna blow up on me? Is she not gonna talk to me? Is she gonna try to put me on the couch? Is she gonna withhold sex from me? So those things start running through the mind. And one of the other triggers is we need to talk, right? Automatically, that sentence triggers we're about to have a negative experience. Traditionally, that's what people think. All right, so that's how you see that the relationship has changed, but the actual practice has not. It's still there, and it becomes something that's kind of second nature. And that's where it gets interesting to me because sometimes we look at adult behavior without asking where the person practiced it before you. And when I say that, not just asking it about other people because it's easy to do that, but ask it of ourselves. Like, where did I even learn that? Right? So, the cycle that you see as a boy, as a child, is telling the truth leads to a negative reaction. So, I need to manage the information and I can avoid the reaction or lessen it, right? That's my reward. As a man, if telling the truth, that is anticipated conflict. So I need to manage the information to avoid the reaction. You see? So different woman, different relationship, same strategy. Okay. And again, I'm not excusing lying. I'm asking us to examine the rehearsal part because when I talk about practicing our lives, right, we say we live them, but the things that we do, we practice it every day. We can change those practices. Some people will say, and I put that out before, no one can change. That's untrue. People have to accept that they don't want to change the practice, that they're comfortable in that practice, and that's fine. But it doesn't mean that a person cannot change, okay? Something doesn't have to be consciously chosen to become practice. You do something enough times and figure out that it works. Eventually, your brain just says, oh, this is how we handle this, okay? And the avoidance it rewards itself in this scenario because there's a pattern and it starts to get even stronger. If you start imagining that he thinks telling his partner something is going to whatever, if even if it's about his feelings or just what happened in the day or that some woman spoke to him or whatnot, then that may start an argument, right? If he doesn't tell her, guess what's going to happen? Nothing, right? There's not going to be an argument. There's not going to be uncomfortable conversation. There's not going to be, an interruption in cooking. He's going to get dinner that night. Everyone's going to eat. Everyone's going to go to sleep. Everyone's going to have a good day. And at the end of the day, does everybody wants to have like a peaceful experience, right? So, how do we have a peaceful experience? By having calm nervous system. So when we're having everybody's nerves and the nervous system gets to rest that day. But it also reinforces that, hey, avoiding the truth works, right? Until the latter part of the week or the next month or the next year or the next 20 years, right? Because with paternity things, maybe you don't find out for 18 years or so. But at some point, The information is found out, and now the argument isn't just about what happened. There's other things that are included in the argument. Now it's also going to be about the fact that, hey, you lied. Um, you hid this from me. You knew this whole time, right? So it's like you're being false right in my face, lying to my face. People take that offensive. And then it may even go into like, well, what else are you not even telling me, right? What else could you be hiding? If you would hide one thing, then you would hide another thing. So now this molehill has perceivably turned into a mountain, right? The conflict is 10 times worse, and strangely enough, that can reinforce the original belief. See, this is why I don't tell you anything, right? Sir. But that's what people will be thinking. That's why I don't want to tell you anything, because this is how you're going to react. The problem isn't necessarily the truth. Sometimes it is. And there's also consequences to the choices that we make at times. The problem may have been what happened between the truth and the time that you find out, right? So now we have this loop. I'm anticipating the conflict. I'm hiding information. I'm getting my temporary peace, that nervous system relaxation, right? Then the truth comes out. I experience a bigger conflict. I decide that honesty creates conflict, and then I hide more next time. I give more effort when I do my hiding next time, right? That's a relationship trap. Now, here's where I'm going to make everybody a little bit uncomfortable. And I think I've said a lot of things that make us uncomfortable, because when we're uncomfortable, we're out of the comfort zone, right? That is an opportunity to grow. That is an opportunity to see something from a different angle, even if we choose not to practice something different, right? Now, I don't think that we can ask men to become more emotionally honest while refusing to examine how we sometimes respond when they actually tell us something we don't want to hear, right? We say, just be honest with me, but do we mean that? Okay. Um, like as a parent, our feelings do get hurt. Kids are truthfully observing us being fat or us wearing fake hair, things like that, very innocent things, right? And that's still something that can bother us. When a kid reads that on us, I love my mom, right? I love my dad. So I wouldn't want to say anything that would hurt them. I don't want to talk about them in a bad way, but they're not able to share any uncomfortable truth, okay? So what happens when the honest answer is, I don't know if I want to get married. I don't like when you do that. I need some space, right? I need some peace. That hurt my feelings, because for some reason, feelings only belong to women, but every human being has feelings and emotions, and they're expressed or they are suppressed. We expect men to suppress their emotions, okay? Oh no, I like my sunflower. We expect men to suppress their emotions, but they have them, and they should be able to express them without losing their leadership, their role, their masculinity, or whatnot, right? What if they're expressing that they don't feel confident? Again, there should be no consequences of losing authority or your leadership, your masculinity. You can, that it's a normal feeling that people have. Have being scared is a normal feeling that people have. Making terrible decisions is just something that people do, right? And sometimes you make a decision, you don't know how to fix it. So if I'm telling you, I made a terrible decision, they don't want anyone to worry. They don't want you to yell. So I'm not going to tell you about it. Maybe I don't even know how to fix it. And if they admitted to you that they didn't know how, what would be the response? Because that would be the true answer. What would be our reactions? Would we lose faith? Would we, you see? So it just brings on additional things and they're already carrying that thing. Okay. What if they even want to express that their feelings have changed? No one has well, some people do, but for the most part, no one has the intention of hurting people in that way. Can you hear truth? And that's what we have to ask ourselves. Can we hear truth without requiring the truth to make us feel good? Because every truth doesn't make us feel good. And that's difficult, right? And emotional safety does not mean freedom from consequences. So just because I'm bringing you the truth doesn't mean that you're going to stay around, that you have to like it, right? If your partner cheats and tells you the truth, emotional safety doesn't mean, well, thank you for being honest, babe. Let's get something to eat. That's not that's not going to happen, and that's not a realistic response. But there can be things built into the conversation and agreements that you can make, like, okay, I'm going to share this with you. And then after I do, let's take a minute for you to process it, you know, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and then let's start a conversation, right? You can appreciate honesty and still like pack somebody's bags, right? Tell them hit the road, Jack. You really can. Right? I respect your honesty. And in return, to reciprocate, you have to respect how that person wants to handle it because they have boundaries, they have their standards, they have things that they align with, right? So those things can coexist. Truth can have consequences without honesty itself being punished. And that's the distinction. Okay. And for mothers, if we're raising boys, I haven't raised a boy. But maybe the question isn't just about how do I make sure my son doesn't lie, right? Because maybe you're listening and you're thinking that. Maybe it's more like, how do I help my son practice telling difficult truths? And not just with our sons, but with our daughters. How can we help our children tell difficult truths? How do we build an environment that is safe for that? Because that's a completely different skill. If you imagine saying, like, I may not like what you're about to tell me, and there still may be consequences for what happened, but I do want the truth. That's something I had to learn. Sometimes the truth is so hard to swallow. And that's where I get the break from because I was one of those people like, okay, let me digest it in, right? Because my immediate reaction may not be the most appropriate action, to be honest with you. It's knee jerk. Okay. You can also thank somebody for telling you, and then now we have to, now we can deal with what happened. Affirm the truthful disclosure. And if a consequence, you know, is what is going to be, then okay, now we can address that and talk that out. But the honesty is still valued, right? That teaches something powerful that the behavior may create consequences, but the truth doesn't destroy the relationship. And when I say doesn't destroy the relationship, it comes to an end. But the respect in that moment for the truth, you don't lose respect for a person because they're telling you the truth, right? The truth angers you, that could happen, but the respect for telling the truth is there, for being upfront and honest and being able to give me a choice in proceeding, especially when you talk about cheating, right? Give me a choice in proceeding. That is emotional safety. It's not permissiveness and it's not a lack of discipline. It's safety. It's creating this space, okay? And then also, I think something that's very common is we get tied to the things in our childhood, but our childhood is not a permission slip to keep practicing things that don't align with our best self, right? So, gentlemen, step up to the plate when I say, understanding where you learn something does not give you permission to keep practicing it forever, right? When you do that, you make that choice. You make that choice. Maybe lying protected you once. Maybe silence protected you. Maybe telling people what they wanted to hear kept the peace, during your childhood. Maybe vulnerability wasn't something that was welcomed and embraced. There was no space for that. Maybe disagreement was interpreted as something that was disrespect. That definitely happens with parents a lot, right? Like if a parent is telling a lie and a child says that, liar is not a profanity. But as parents, we have turned it into like, how could you call me a liar, right? But but is it a lie though? You know? So that deserves understanding, okay? But we're grown. When we grow up, we eventually have to start asking, does the strategy that protected me as a child serve me as an adult in my relationships now? Because when we have partners in our partnerships, we shouldn't have to keep paying for survival strategies developed in a house or in a scenario that you were never a part of. And that's what people mean by I don't want to take on other people's things. I don't want to manage other people's emotions. I don't want to navigate other people's traumas, right? And some people will say, well, that's a mean thing to say. In all actuality, no one should be managing anyone else's traumas. That is our sole responsibility. That is us. They are dealing with our presentation, right? With whatever experiences we've had. So when we examine ourselves, we get to choose a different practice, a healthier practice, if that's what we feel. It doesn't have to be, that's just how I am. That's how you choose to be. And that's okay too, right? But there are consequences that you may not like about that. Maybe people don't want to be around you. Maybe you don't get invited to things, right? That's just how you are. And for those other individuals, that's just how they are as well. The energy is not aligning, and that's okay. Okay. But we can identify the practice, we can understand why it developed, and then we decide whether we're going to keep that practice or not. Try practicing something different. I say this all the time about we practice our lives. Where do we get the idea that we can't practice anything different? I'm not sure. From our environment, from media, all these places. There's so many points of feedback, right, that we're receiving every day in our lives. But we practice how we love. We practice how we communicate. We practice how we respond when we are scared and fearful. We practice what we wear, what we pursue, um, what we tolerate. We practice that and how we engage other people. And if whatever we're practicing isn't producing the vision that we have for our lives, then we may need to practice something different. Okay. So maybe honesty needs more practice. I tell my kids that practice telling the truth. Like maybe you need to pause when you before, okay, you thought about telling a lie. All right, now go ahead and tell the truth. Practice saying, I need to tell you something uncomfortable. Practice admitting I was wrong. Accountability. Practice saying, I'm afraid that you're going to be angry. I'm afraid that you're going to walk away. I'm afraid that this is going to ruin our relationship. It's like that, the feelings wheel, right? Name it. When you name it, you could tame it. I heard that today and I love that. When you name it, you could tame it. Okay? I'm afraid this is going to happen, and that's making me want to avoid this conversation. That is vulnerability. That is truth, right? That is accountability. Practice telling the truth before somebody discovers it, right? They don't have to know that, hey, that conversation got a little bit inappropriate, right? But being honest about it may put you in a position to say, I'm on a corrected course. That's not something that I want to keep doing, right? And then you don't have to worry about if this person runs into the person or somebody heard or saw, right? And on the receiving side, practice hearing uncomfortable truths without immediately turning vulnerability into ammunition. Because if somebody tells you, this is hard for me to admit, and then 6 months later, you throw it in their face during an argument, you just taught them something. You just reinforced the very thing that they were afraid of, right? We're always teaching people something about what happens when they're vulnerable with us. So we come to a point of you never want to do this. You never, something has happened. We have practiced something so much. And they've learned I cannot. Okay. So I'm not just wanting to leave you with the thing of, okay, well, men are liars. No, 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 no. And I don't want to leave you with men are liars because of their mothers. That's not it. That's very simple. And eh, that's not the psychology of things, right? I want to leave you with something more useful. And that thing is investigating, where did I practice the relationship skills I'm using today? Who taught me what happens when I tell the truth? Who taught me what happens when I disagree? Who taught me what vulnerability is gonna cost? Who taught me whether love remains after there's disappointment? Okay. And most importantly, are those still lessons I want to live by? Are they? Because childhood may explain our practices in our adulthood, but it doesn't have to determine the performance. All right. Um, if you're journaling or just reflecting, think about how you grew up, what your childhood was like. What happened when you told an uncomfortable truth? Were you listened to? Were you punished? Were you shamed? Were you questioned? Were you dismissed? Were you supported? What happened? And then ask yourself, when someone I love tells me an uncomfortable truth, what am I teaching them about the cost of being honest with me? Think about your responses, your reactions, if you isolate, if you withdraw, like think about all those things because it's not always about yelling either, right? Sometimes it's about shutting down. So needing space and shutting down are not the same thing either. But I won't get in that. I don't want it to get too long. Okay. I'm gonna give you the skinny on that. Okay. And we're gonna put a pin in it. Maybe we can do like a second part or something or a continuation on a subject. But for now, let's put a pin in it and we'll come back next week and talk about something else. And so this has been, you've been listening to and joining Shay's Pretty Skinny, the podcast. And we are always doing everything except keeping it cute about self-love, resilience, and personal development. And just remember, don't just ask people to tell you the truth and be truthful with you, but become someone with whom the truth can be told and trusted. Be someone where the space for vulnerability can be held. Have a good one.